General Hospital will reveal Drew did not hesitate to pay Brad a huge sum of $500,000 in exchange for valuable intelligence. Drew's goal was clearly not just to defeat his opponents but to build an even bigger, more sinister plan. Brad, always looking for ways to profit from any situation, quickly agreed. This deal put him in a position to make decisions and take actions that would affect the lives of everyone around him. With the $500,000 in hand, Brad wasted no time revealing a shocking truth to Drew. It was Portia Robinson who was behind the entire drug trafficking operation, the one who had caused all the chaos. Brad went into detail about what Portia had done. She wasn't just the mastermind, she was extremely bold in her actions. Portia had used Brad to infiltrate Drew's medical records, access his files, and steal ketamine, a substance Drew would later use for his own nefarious purposes. This move by Portia wasn't just illegal, it also allowed Drew to use the drug in his dark schemes, carrying out his criminal plans. Brad, who had a long history of deceit and betrayal, seemed to take pleasure in watching Portia's downfall. But Drew, with his sharp mind and ambitious nature, wasn't satisfied with just this information. He didn't want to stop at taking down Portia, he wanted to expand his strategy, and his goals grew even darker. Drew, with his calculated mindset, made a shocking offer to Brad. He would double the reward to $1 million if Brad agreed to do one more thing for him. This wasn't a small request. Drew wanted Brad to continue playing a part in his plan, a much more dangerous and twisted plan. Though Brad had already secured a large sum of money, the temptation of even more cash was too great for him to refuse. Drew began laying out a bigger, more sinister plan. He no longer wanted to just eliminate Portia. He wanted to take down everyone he saw as a threat: Curtis, Nina, and Portia. These three were not just obstacles in his way. They were significant barriers that could prevent him from consolidating power and executing his dark ambitions. Drew realized that if he could eliminate these people, he would be completely free to carry out his schemes without opposition. Drew's plan became increasingly complicated and dangerous, as each step he took could lead to unforeseen consequences. The alliance between Drew and Brad appeared to be a marriage of convenience, with both having their own motives for continuing their involvement in this criminal game. Drew, a cold and ruthless man, was setting into motion a plan that no one could foresee, and as he started to take the next steps in his plot, everything became more complicated than ever. Betrayal, greed, and cunning calculations formed a tight web that only Drew and Brad fully understood, and their ultimate goal remained a mystery to everyone else. However, Drew's machinations might not unfold as he intended, as the significant threats he was facing didn't only come from those he wanted to eliminate, but also from those who were quietly observing and working to disrupt his plan. However, Drew's plan was far from going smoothly. Kai, who had begun to grow suspicious of Brad and Drew's activities, quietly started keeping an eye on them. He noticed that something didn't sit right with the way they were acting. There was an undercurrent of secrecy and unease surrounding their every move. Over the course of a few weeks, Kai closely observed their interactions, paying attention to the subtle signs that hinted at a much darker scheme than either Brad or Drew was willing to reveal. As Kai continued to follow them, he began to piece together the bigger picture. He realized that Drew, a man he had once thought of as someone with ambition, was far more dangerous than he had initially perceived. Drew wasn't just aiming for success or power, he was willing to go to any length to achieve his goals, even if it meant putting innocent people at risk or stepping over the bodies of those who trusted him. Kai's suspicions were confirmed when he saw Drew manipulating people, playing them like chess pieces on a board, without any regard for their safety or well-being. It became abundantly clear to him that Drew was a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And this realization sent a chill down Kai's spine. With this critical information now in his possession, Kai knew he had to act before Drew's plan spiraled out of control. He couldn't allow someone like Drew to continue executing his manipulative, dangerous schemes without anyone standing in his way. But Kai also understood that he couldn't do it alone. Drew had already surrounded himself with people like Brad, who had a clear disregard for right and wrong, and who was only too willing to profit from Drew's machinations. Kai realized that he needed to team up with someone who could help him expose Drew's plot, someone who could both be a powerful ally and someone who understood the stakes involved. That's when he turned to Trina. Trina, like Kai, had always been someone who valued justice and truth, and after hearing bits and pieces of Drew's shady dealings, she too had begun to grow suspicious. It didn't take much for Kai to convince her to join forces with him. Trina, already aware of how much damage Drew was capable of, agreed to work with Kai to thwart his plans. Together, they formed an unspoken alliance, their shared goal being to tear down the web of lies that Drew had carefully constructed. Their plan was to work in secrecy, moving under the radar to gather more evidence and to carefully monitor the actions of Drew and Brad. They knew that if they made one wrong move, Drew could easily turn the tables and spin things in his favor. Their strategy was clear: expose Drew's plan, break his hold on Brad, and make sure the truth came to light before it was too late. They worked tirelessly behind the scenes, feeding information to the right people at the right time, laying traps to catch Drew in his own lies, and creating a strategy that would ensure his downfall. It wasn't just about stopping Drew's current plan, it was about showing the world his true nature. Kai and Trina knew that if they could make Drew pay for his manipulation and deceit, it would serve as a warning to others who might try to follow in his footsteps. Brad, too, would be forced to confront the truth about his choices and the consequences of aligning himself with someone like Drew. Trina and Kai's efforts were aimed at ensuring that Brad would not escape unscathed, but also to make him regret the decisions that led him to this point. As Kai and Trina's plot started to unfold, the tension grew, and the walls Drew had built around himself began to crumble. With each move they made, the noose tightened around Drew's neck. And it became clear that his once seemingly foolproof plan was now unraveling before his eyes. The game had changed, and Drew no longer had the upper hand. Kai and Trina, though operating in the shadows, were now the ones controlling the narrative, and it was only a matter of time before Drew's treachery was exposed for all to see. The plan that had seemed so meticulously constructed now stood on the brink of collapse, all thanks to the quiet, determined efforts of two people who refused to let him get away with his dark schemes. When Brad finally realized that he had been used as a pawn in Drew's sinister game, the weight of his own actions hit him like a ton of bricks. His shady dealings with Drew, once motivated by the promise of quick riches and the allure of power, would soon be exposed for the world to see. Brad could no longer deny the truth: he had been manipulated by Drew, and in the process, he had betrayed not just himself, but the people around him. The carefully constructed facade he had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The information that Brad had unwittingly helped Drew conceal was now on the verge of being revealed. All of the secretive transactions, the illicit dealings, and the manipulation of innocent people were slowly coming to light. What had once seemed like a series of clever, if morally questionable, moves now appeared to be an intricate web of deceit and criminal activity. Brad had been so eager to gain favor with Drew, so blinded by the promises of wealth and success, that he never stopped to question the motives behind Drew's actions. Now, as the truth began to surface, Brad realized the full extent of his mistakes. His involvement in Drew's plans was no longer something he could hide. The law was closing in, and Brad was facing the very real possibility of being arrested. The evidence against him was undeniable. Drew, once the master manipulator, was also caught in the same tangled web. His attempts to hide his crimes and keep his secrets buried were falling apart one by one. Drew could no longer cover his tracks, and the truth about his involvement in various illegal activities was coming to the surface faster than he could manage. What had seemed like an airtight scheme, with careful layers of deception, now appeared to be unraveling at a rapid pace. Drew had underestimated the power of his enemies and the consequences of his actions. The more he tried to control the situation, the more it slipped out of his grasp. This revelation was not just a shock to Brad, it also hit Willow with a devastating force. For so long, Willow had placed her trust in Drew. She had believed in him, loved him, and stood by his side, convinced that he was a man of integrity, or at the very least, someone who had the potential to be redeemed. Drew had manipulated her just as easily as he had manipulated Brad, using her loyalty to hide the dark truth about his actions. When Willow was confronted with the reality of Drew's true nature, the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. The man she had once loved and trusted had been the architect of countless deceptions. And the realization left her feeling hollow and broken. Willow's heart ached as she struggled to comprehend the truth. The pain of seeing Drew's true colors, his willingness to sacrifice others for his own gain, was almost too much to bear. All the moments of tenderness, all the promises he had made to her, now seemed like cruel jokes, designed to pull her into his web of lies. How could the man she had believed in for so long have been capable of such manipulation? The betrayal cut deep. Not just because of the lies, but because of the trust she had placed in Drew, and the way he had used that trust to further his own ends. As Drew's actions continued to unravel, Willow found herself questioning everything she had once believed. The foundation of her relationship with him, once solid and unshakable, was now in ruins. The person she had thought she knew had vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating individual who would do anything to get what he wanted. The emotional turmoil Willow felt was palpable. She had spent so much time invested in a man who, in the end, was just as dangerous as the enemies he had once claimed to fight against. Her heart broke for the woman she had once been. For the innocence she had lost in the wake of Drew's betrayal. As Brad's actions came under scrutiny and Drew's plans fell apart, it became clear that the price of loyalty to the wrong person was steep. Willow, along with everyone else who had been deceived by Drew, would have to pick up the pieces of their shattered trust. The emotional weight of this truth would be a heavy burden for Willow to carry, and it was unclear if she would ever be able to look at Drew the same way again. For now, all she could do was process the pain and figure out how to move forward from the wreckage of the life she had once believed in. Everything seemed to be spiraling out of control for Drew. As his meticulously crafted plans began to unravel in the harsh light of betrayal and truth. What had once appeared to be a flawless strategy, a web of manipulation and deceit that he had carefully constructed to keep his enemies at bay, now lay in ruins. The secrets he had so carefully hidden for so long were no longer safe. His once ironclad control over the situation was slipping through his fingers, as the very forces he had sought to control began to turn against him. Drew had underestimated the strength of those he had wronged, and he was now facing the consequences of his actions. Trina and Kai, two people who had been quietly observing Drew's machinations from the shadows, were now at the forefront of the battle to expose him for what he truly was. They had once been bystanders. Unsure of how to stop the dangerous path Drew was leading them all down, but now they had become the very people standing in his way. With the truth slowly coming to light, they knew they could no longer sit back and watch. Their resolve had only strengthened as they worked tirelessly to dismantle the web of lies that Drew had woven around him. Trina, driven by a deep sense of justice and a desire to protect those she loved, had become the catalyst for the shift in power. She was no longer the passive observer she had once been. The moment she realized the full extent of Drew's betrayal, she vowed to do whatever it took to stop him, even if it meant putting herself in danger. She was determined to see justice served. Not just for her own sake, but for everyone who had been hurt by Drew's manipulation. It was no longer just about taking him down, it was about making sure that Drew could never hurt anyone again. And that the truth would finally come to light. Kai, too, had become a crucial ally in the fight against Drew. Once a man struggling with his own demons, he had found a new sense of purpose in his partnership with Trina. The more he uncovered about Drew's actions, the more he realized the full scale of the damage Drew had caused. No longer willing to stand idly by, Kai had pledged to fight back with everything he had. His involvement had been essential, as he had access to the information that could bring Drew's schemes crashing down. The two of them had formed a powerful alliance, one that would see their every move carefully planned and executed, until Drew was exposed for the manipulative criminal he was. But Trina and Kai knew that they could not do it alone. They needed the support of others, and they found allies in unexpected places. The people who had once trusted Drew, the people who had been deceived by his charm and promises, were now turning against him. As they began to uncover more of his lies and the depths of his betrayal, they too joined the fight to bring him down. The support of these individuals, once loyal to Drew, gave Trina and Kai the strength they needed to keep going, despite the danger they faced. Every move they made was calculated, and they knew that one wrong step could give Drew the upper hand. But with each piece of evidence they gathered, each lie they exposed, the walls around Drew began to close in. It was only a matter of time before the truth would catch up with him. His empire of lies was crumbling, and there was no way to stop the inevitable. As the investigation gained momentum, Drew's world began to collapse. His allies began to turn on him, and the people he had once trusted started to realize that they had been manipulated all along. The more they uncovered about his actions, the more difficult it became for Drew to keep up the charade. His carefully constructed facade of being a man of integrity, a man with good intentions, was shattered beyond repair. Those who had once followed him now saw him for what he truly was, a ruthless, calculating individual who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. In the final stages of their pursuit, Trina and Kai knew they were on the brink of victory. But even as the pieces fell into place, there was still a lingering fear that Drew would find a way to escape justice. He had always been slippery, always one step ahead. But this time, he was cornered, and the truth was closing in on him. The realization that there was no way out, no escape from the consequences of his actions, began to break him down. His once unshakable confidence faltered as he realized that, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't outrun the truth. The ultimate showdown was coming. Justice was about to be served, and Drew's reign of manipulation and deceit would come to an end. As Trina and Kai prepared for the final confrontation, they knew that this was their moment. Their chance to take down the man who had caused so much pain and suffering. With the full weight of their determination and the truth on their side, they were ready to see justice through to the end. Drew's plans had ultimately backfired. What he had once thought was his greatest strength had now become his greatest downfall. The people he had wronged were no longer passive victims, and the truth was no longer something he could hide. As his world collapsed around him, he realized that the fight for justice was one that he could never win. Trina and Kai, with the support of their allies, had won the battle, and Drew would finally face the consequences of his actions. The truth would prevail, and Drew's manipulations would be exposed for all to see.